I think the biggest changes, we do throw some of those in, but I think the biggest changes has been in, I guess, creating the longest, most stable, like moment arm possible, like within the prime mover, which means that your loads are going to take a hit in some cases, right? So for example, like most people, when they get on the leg press, where they place their stance is kind of in a neutral place where they can have a lot of muscle groups like joining in at once. So it's not just quads, it's like quads and friends. It's like quads, the adductors, the glutes. They're all helping. So what I'll do is just to, for example, on that movement, is have them move their feet as low as they can. And for some people, they can even have a little bit of heel lift. And because there's so many more constraints on a leg press, like they don't lose a whole lot of output, if any at all. And we just perform the leg press that way with the knees really kicking forward. And the cool part is like, hey, you don't have to use as many warm-ups because you can't go as heavy.
You can't go very heavy.
It introduces you to perhaps some in ranges you haven't really had a chance to visit before, especially if you were, not built in a squat specific fashion, which I have found to be just great for like joint integrity. Like when we first got our Cybex hack squat at the gym, it's a very knee dominant movement as is, but I really pushed the limits to the point where like my feet are at the bottom, like touching the floor basically. And it was great to see that it was like that good pain. Like you learn to tell the difference. Like the first few times I did it, I was like, ooh, my knees don't fully like it, but I know it's just going to get better every time. So there's like some therapeutic properties to it. My knees have always been like a pretty good joint, but I'm like, oh my God, they're going to be like just super fortified at the end of this, aside from like just the quad gains. And as you get older, you really start to appreciate the fact that like, man, like I'm strong through the full range of motion. So a lot of it is figuring that out with the quad stuff, like the squat patterns, and then a lot less pulling from the floor, some more like hip hinges, like whichever one people tend to be the most proficient in. And then with the ISO stuff, it's just been, I don't know, that's a great way to rack up like some extra volume, and it's way less taxing systematically as well. But I will say this, when especially on the leg press, when you're like really biasing the quads, like you can go pretty close to failure or to failure, and it's not all that terrible because the loads are lighter, so there's less inhibition. And since there isn't all these muscle groups firing at once, or less of like the adductors and the glutes, right? It doesn't drain you nearly as much. So a lot of it has just been looking at how the athletes put together what equipment they have access to, and trying to find the best fit. And again, not everyone has everything, and there's always ways to work around that. And even if they want to squat, like it's one of those things where it's just important to understand the strengths of your tool. Like with a barbell squat, it's got its pros, but it also has its cons, and also understanding the limitations as well. But yeah, for the most part, it's just been using things that maybe make it so that we can't lift as much, but again, we're creating these longer moment arms and more torque in those lengthened positions. So it's like, hey, that 4.5 plate deadlift 4 sets of 5 you were doing, it's like, we might be like just under 3 plates with our RDL, but it's going to be way better for the areas that you're trying to target, right? And more specific to those tissues. But again, I'm not anti-fun either. I think at some point I want to try squatting again, now that like my quads have grown substantially since the last time I dipped into squatting. And I think last time I barely squeaked over 500. And I do think this next time, because of the upgrades in muscle mass, I'll probably like clear that a lot more efficiently. Yeah. So yeah, that's the main thing when it comes to lower body days. And they tend to be a lot less daunting. And since the loads aren't as big, like people don't get like hungry hippo with it and like try to do too much. They're a lot more patient with it. Because it's not like anything you're going to be lifting is like super impressive. Like when you look at Dirk's lifts, like people don't realize like Dirk can be a really strong dude if he wants to, especially with his like shorter appendages. But like we're trying to figure out ways to make the exercises as challenging as possible. So yeah, a lot of that that's been basically what we've been doing. And yeah, some things like integrated partials. The MyoRep work I think really comes in handy, especially when you're dieting, because it just saves up a lot of like those carbs. So things are just a little bit less, just less total reps over the course of a training session. But I don't know, man, a person has to be ready for that intervention. But oddly enough, by the time a person is ready for that, they mentally, I guess they've been training long enough for, the target is getting smaller. They have to be more specific at this point. And more than another plate on the squat, they just want to see growth in their quads, growth that they, in some cases haven't seen in years.
Yeah, it is a change in mindset. You mentioned the leg press, and with the kind of heels elevated, you can't really, there's not much that you can do to prolong failure. It's almost like you go down, you feel the burn, you go down again, and you're just like, oh, that's not moving. Like that's all I got. As opposed to getting strapped into a leg extension machine and like cranking up reps and it's burning, but you're compensating and it's burning more, you're burning more. Like you can't do that stuff. It's just like you go down, that's not moving anymore. Okay, guess that's what I got for this set. So before I mentioned that I use a barbell squat because I'm training at home, but it's very different than a typical someone getting under the bar. Like I'm using a heel lift. I'm going in there with that mindset of imagining I'm in some kind of machine, just letting that bar go down and come back up. When I can't do that anymore, maybe I'll get a rep or two where I pop the hips back and just kind of get it up so I don't get crushed. But I am using that change in technique almost like a spotter. So like I'm going down, keeping that nice and controlled. And then when I need to call upon that, I'll help myself up one or two times, but I'm doing that knowing that I'm doing it. And then I mentioned that I also do split squats. I have slowly elevated my front foot to get a deeper stretch on my glute in the fully lengthened position. So at this point, I have 3 plates under my front foot, and I'm getting that nice deep stretch. Like it feels like, honestly, that movement feels like I'm just stretching my glutes holding a dumbbell. It doesn't. That's kind of the mindset going into it. But yeah, I think that mindset shift of I'm going to annihilate this weight off my back versus I'm going to keep this as strict as possible. And focus on the muscle I'm trying to hit, trying to get depth that I want. And to get to those depths, take it slow. If you're just used to doing walking lunges, don't go put that front foot up on a rear foot elevated split squat and just whoop, pop right down. Make sure you take it slow and do some lightweight movements and see if you can go that deep. If you have pain with those range of motion, then gradually work into them. But if you want to get to those points, at least you have a goal to move forward to. But if you can't right away, don't worry about it. Like you can gradually work into those to those depths. But yeah, I like what you said, Bert, about the mindset going into it. It's a lot less taxing, like emotionally and physically, because there's not much more you can do. It's just, all right, that's it. It's a literal failure. I can't move my leg anymore.
3 things you said there, Nick. I think one with really lengthened positions, because the muscle is always going to fatigue from shortened to lengthened. And I guess what you'll never see like a 3-second, I don't know, like pullover, right? Compared to say like a leg extension. So those things just kind of like, sometimes it looks like on, say, my hack squat is like, he just gave up. I'm like, no, dude, that was like an RP, like 9.5. Like, it's just the next set. It's like someone just cuts the cable on the elevator. Like, it's just done. And then the other thing is, the sensation's very different, because I think most of us initially, we perhaps look too much for like the squeeze portion, and it's different sensations that you're training yourself to look for when it is something that is lengthened. And lastly, it's like, the range of motion can be a progression scheme. Like with my hack squat, like I told you, my knees were a little achy, like just the right amount of watery afterwards where I'm like, oh, I needed this. Like this was something I needed to tap into. Like there's these lines in the hack squat, and instead of like upping load, I would just kind of sneak my feet like a little bit more. So yeah, it's a very, man, it's like eating caviar, right? It's you don't just like trash it like I don't know, like a Chinese buffet. Like it's something that you really have to be locked in and aware, but in a totally different, much more mature way.
I hope, if anything, that we're exciting some of the less strong bodybuilders and powerlifters up there, and dare I say, even like I don't want to use the term old, but our seasoned bodybuilders, right, that have been at the game in a long time. And they're like, man, I can't do it anymore. I can't handle these loads anymore. I can't handle the exercises anymore. It's like, well, you know what? You could be tapping into newbie-ish type gains if you try. Let's just work that range of motion a little bit more. Let's get that muscle a little bit more stretched under load. Let's make it move that load from that fully stretched position. And guess what? It ain't going to have to be a whole lot. You're going to find yourself like a kid again, curling those 210s on the end of that easy curl bar, and it's really, really heavy, and it's also, you're going to find that it's also, pretty darn effective, at that. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of exciting to know that all of these things that we've talked about here, gentlemen, are things that I've just now kind of scratched the surface on, and here I'm kind of thinking, that this is Brad's last hurrah, in bodybuilding, and really excited about powerlifting, and kind of tacking on the bodybuilding on top of it, because it's kind of on the way, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's like, well, maybe not. You know what? Maybe there's something to competing well into your 50s and even early 60s if you can, make that mindset of, okay, let's just let the ego go here a little bit. Berto, I think that you recently said that you're benching a $185 with that funky looking bar that's got the bend in the middle. Your elbows are like practically touching the floor on your bench press. Those are the kind of things that are kind of exciting. I can kind of start over again, over with the Brad that was elated when I was squatting 225 for the very first time. Well, I can kind of do that now with 135 pounds on the bar. And instead of throwing 10 plates on the leg press, let's cut that in half, and put a plate or two and maybe a quarter, and then let my butt come off the bench a little bit, and them heels rise up, and really stretch those quads, and play around with that sensation that you guys talked about, that weird sensation. It's just like you're pushing, but nothing's happening. Yeah, that is pretty odd.